middle of a conversation when suddenly there was a significant commotion in his department. Many colleagues interrupted their discussions with customers and began shouting to each other about what was happening. An attack had been carried out on the royal family. They were about to take a short vacation at one of their overseas residences. The attack had occurred on the grounds of Schiphol Airport. No further details were known yet. The department head urged the staff to remain silent and suggested they find a place in the break room where there was a television to calmly wait for further developments. The TV was turned on, and all stations were broadcasting live footage from a smoke-covered Schiphol. Due to the severity of the attack, panic had broken out in the passenger terminals. 2 seconds before the main explosion, the first bombs had gone off, and ambulances with severely injured victims were rushing back and forth. The bombs were hidden in the carts that transport the crew to their planes and in some maintenance carts. All had been detonated via remote control. The death toll was in the hundreds. The first thing Tom noticed was a cordon being set up around Schiphol. Not by regular police, but by heavily armed troops dressed in black with EU emblems on their outfits. Could these be the first signs, he wondered? The NOS reporter, crying, her face covered in tears, reported that almost all members of the royal family were involved in the attack. The children and Willem Alexander were not. He was still recovering from his double leg fracture sustained during his last skiing holiday in Lech. The children had been left at home with their nannies. Beatrix, Maxima, all of Willem Alexander's brothers, their wives, and the accompanying court staff were victims of one of the bloodiest murders ever committed against a royal family. What on earth was going on here? The department head thought it best to listen to the traffic information because she had decided to send everyone home for the day. There would be no more business. But if everyone had the same idea, it could take a long time before everyone got home safely. After seeing the expected traffic congestion, she suggested waiting until later in the evening. The proposal was accepted, and everyone sat back down in front of the TV as more news slowly started coming out about the attack. Balkenende appeared on the screen, completely devastated and looking at least 50 years older. He said that for the first time in his life, he was speechless. Democracy in the Netherlands had been hollowed out and was effectively dead after this horrific attack. Beatrix's successor, Alexander, had indicated that he did not intend to succeed her as the new monarch after this attack. The severity of the attack and the threats they had previously received, warning that this would happen, had made him reconsider. No king or queen would mean the end of our kingdom. This did not make the country leaderless, but it significantly impacted how we would interact with each other from now on. According to him, the Republicans were now lying in wait to seize their chance to govern the Netherlands as a republic. He said that at this moment, an investigation needed to be conducted to understand how this attack could have happened and what it meant for our democracy and its governance. After the attack on Wilders, relatively little had happened, but what was coming now, combined with the economic crisis, was something no one could predict. Not even him. He urged the population to remain calm. Fortunately, the curfew had already been imposed earlier. Now, Situation Code Red was in effect, with everything under control.
Frank and the others watched the footage with horror. They all knew this was going to happen, so they weren't entirely surprised. Frank's phone rang, and he picked it up. "Hey, Frank, also watching the footage?" he heard Peter's voice say. "Spectacular, isn't it? 10 times better than that attempt with the Suzuki Swift." "I knew about it," Frank said to the man he currently regarded as the most dangerous man in the world. "I know your plans, and by now, I know who you really are. That's exactly what I want to talk to you about face to face," Peter replied. "I should mention, though, that I'm still a bit full of adrenaline. It's not often you get the chance to deliver such a spectacle. You should have been there." The first shot was an immediate bullseye. That blonde Argentinian bitch and her deceitful mother-in-law were the first. I can still see how my shot and the resulting explosion tore Beatrix's face apart, wiped that false grin right off her face. At the same time, that Argentinian slut, through the various hits to her admittedly nice body, performed a sort of tango, an Argentinian, death tango. Others got pieces of metal in their lungs or were immediately put out of their misery by the force of the second shot. You probably know who fired that one. I only missed that blonde, Willem A., at this farewell party, but he was at home. No problem. There were still plenty left, and the worst, the deaths of many small children, was spared them. They have something to think about. You also know who's behind this plan? I figured that out by now, Frank said, knowing he was on thin ice. I want to make a deal with you on behalf of my employers. Peter's voice came through clearly, adrenaline-fueled. I want to meet you at the back entrance of the old De Gruyter factory in the V-marked quarter. Tomorrow evening at 10:30 p.m., 10:30 in civilian terms. No one will bother us there. I'll come unarmed, and I hope you do the same. This was going too far for Frank. What nonsense. You know I don't have any weapons and never have. Peter cut him off abruptly, saying it was time he did and that it might be better for his health, just not near him. Frank agreed to the place and agreed to come alone. Immediately afterward, Frank called Roland and Tom and told them about Peter's phone call. He gave them instructions in case he, like Susan, was murdered by this ruthless bastard.
The old De Gruyter factory in the V-marked quarter was mostly empty. The buildings, several of them, were now divided into units and used by small-scale new entrepreneurs with modest budgets, often converted into small studios and office units. Apart from some art and IT activities, there was no real production happening there, and at night the whole area lay dark and deserted. There was security, but Peter would have arranged something about that for tonight. As it began to snow, Frank stood waiting at the side of the first building, as agreed. Next to the truck driveway, he parked his car, lit a cigarette, and turned on the wipers to clear the increasingly thick snow from his windshield. A second car appeared in his rearview mirror, and he saw Peter get out and walk towards the building's entrance. He opened the door and beckoned Frank to follow. Frank stepped out of his car and walked inside. Peter, holding a flashlight, told him to follow. At the end of a long, empty corridor, with a few stacked wooden pallets here and there, they passed through what must have once been an airlock. The heavy plastic lamellae offered slight resistance as he followed Peter into the large hall. The snow-dampened moonlight cast a strange glow through the spacious hall, with a cast-iron staircase leading to a second floor in the center. Using an open freight elevator next to this staircase was also a way to get upstairs. This upper section appeared to be completely open. Frank imagined that this was probably where the administration and management were once housed. From this floor, one had a beautiful view over the entire hall, reminiscent of the bow of a ship. The cathedral-like windows, tapering to a point, created a diffuse light throughout the hall. Some walls were tiled, and hooks hung from beams above a similarly tiled floor. Damn! An abattoir shot through his mind. He imagined the blood of animals splashing against the walls, making him nauseous. What am I doing here, alone with a ruthless killer, and what do I hope to achieve? These thoughts raced through his mind like a roller coaster. It was Peter who started the conversation after first pulling his weapon from his pocket and pointing it at Frank. Yeah, you can never be too careful. This isn't a gangster movie, but cold hard reality. Frank realized this could well be his last moment and decided to just say what he knew. He wasn't afraid of dying. He had lived a good life, and this story might even be the highlight of that colorful life. He had seen and experienced a lot. Everyone is dispensable, so he too would fade into obscurity. Do you know who owns this hall? Peter asked Frank, who now looked at him resolutely. No, he replied. This is the new hall of Rough Diamonds Multimedia, the toy of a certain Farmiedo. Frank remained silent, and Peter continued. That man must be stopped, and the only way to do that is to commit a crime and disappear behind bars for a few years. We don't know who he is, but it becomes very embarrassing when a body is found in your company, especially if there's a tape with the famous last words of the victim. Farmiedo, you? Frank, who by now knew how ruthless his opponent was and how naive he himself had been, said while frantically thinking of how to get out of this alive, I know the plan and the role you play in it, but I also have a question for you. Why the Queen? Peter began to laugh and looked Frank straight in the eyes. She had to be an example for the royal elite. The power of the royal houses within the Illuminati had grown too large, and that didn't sit well with the other branch of the alliance, namely, the Rothschilds and Rockefellers. The power struggle between these two different factions has been going on since the establishment of the Illuminati and their financial interference in the affairs of the involved families. This remained secret for a long time because the lacking technical means didn't yet make their plan possible. Now, with the army behind them, all the new technologies, incidentally, all obtained through back engineering from crashed UFOs, extraterrestrial vessels, and after executing the worldwide Holocaust, they want to become the owners of this renewed version of our planet. They know about the arrival of Nibiru and the return of the Anunnaki, the consequences this brings for our Earth. Floods, volcanoes worldwide. They are prepared to go underground. The old colonial mindset of the royal elite didn't align with the business mindset. And business is business, no hard feelings. I chose the highest bidder. I was Beatrix's lapdog for years and had more than enough of it. I knew she would draw the short straw. Money is a reason for everyone to do things that don't always seem logical. Also, the self-orchestrated attack on Queen's Day to make the population even more fearful and create their own 9/11 was enough to convince me that they were actually a bunch of amateurs. Frank looked at him. But why, if you already had it all together with them? I mean, they devised the whole plan in collaboration with the Illuminati. That's true, but here greed and self-glorification come into play, Peter answered. This Illuminati also consists of Jews, the chosen ones as they call themselves. They are convinced that a revered nobility equates to idolatry and that the real Jews ultimately recognize only one God, namely Satan, and that they are all working on executing the divine plan of the Antichrist. The crucifixion of God's Son Jesus was ultimately their idea. Satan is their God, and he is returning to claim his kingdom. How long will it be before they deal with you? Frank asked in a calm, composed tone. And who killed Susan?
Suddenly, at the end of the hall from the opposite direction they had entered, where there were a couple of small offices, one of the doors opened, and a man walked in. His face was just in the shadow, and Frank had no idea who it could be. That was my responsibility. Frank did not recognize the voice. The man walked slowly toward the pair, and Frank saw Grosfeld's face as he came more into the light. "Why her?" Frank asked. Grosfeld was also armed and made that clear. He answered directly, "She had the coveted diary of Jan van Enschot in her possession. The plan was for Omar to seduce her to get hold of the diary. Her visit to Tilburg came at the wrong time. I thought she had recognized me, so I wanted to get rid of her and immediately sent a few guys after her to fake a car accident. That plan failed. Nonetheless, she remained a threat. She knew the entire plan because Jan had written it all down in that God-forsaken book. When I heard that Peter would be the second shooter of the Royal Dutch Bang, something had to be done. The entire spectacle, just like the murder of Susan, was well set up and went as planned. As for Susan, she was quite a sexy thing. But this was nothing compared to my latest action. The Big Bang at the airport was the highlight of my career. Frank was not very charmed by Grosfeld's tasteless humor and wished he were 1,000 kilometers away, lying on a beach with a beautiful woman. Where is Omar? It didn't go well for him, or should I say, fall. Stephen de Jong, as his passport said, was found dead last week. Broken neck. Death by accident. In this case, his neck. Peter turned toward Grosfeld and looked at him in a way that seemed very calm. You gave that horny camel fucker what he deserved. I had been planning it since the attack on Wilders, but I got orders from higher up to leave him alone. Tidied up nicely. As he said this, he shot Grosfeld in the face with his Luger. The surprised look in Grosfeld's eyes disappeared immediately as his face exploded like an overripe melon. Special bullets, now. What was that necessary for? Frank asked the increasingly threatening figure, now standing so close he could smell the man's breath. The still warm barrel of the gun pressed against his jacket, starting to scorch a hole. Pity about the jacket. He saw no way out of this precarious situation. and his stomach felt like it had been hit by a sledgehammer. Peter took a big step back. "What should I do with you?" The real fear of death made him sharper. Does the condemned man get a last wish, if only for our years of friendship, and an answer to an important question? What do you hope to gain from this? Peter took out a pack of cigarettes, gave one to Frank, who had now stood up again, and said, "A lot of money. A whole lot of money and protection, a place with the survivors when they decide to go underground. I've also heard of space colonies, places where people are transported using the latest techniques. I'll see what happens." Back to the Schiphol attack. Grosfeld was right when he said it was the highlight of his career.